Now, my lecture is mostly about the observation of interactions like government and community during the 1960s, 1980s period, so 1970s. I do generally focus on the 1960s to 2000s period in my research for my doctoral thesis work, but for the purposes of the presentation, it is mostly 1970s, and I'm sticking pre-1990s. I'm going to give a quick itinerary for the evening, as was recommended to me. I'll give some foundations of where I started and some of the terminology I'm using, and give the setting of the mentality of the greater Vancouver area leading up to China Creek. This will lead into a somewhat brief overview of the park's history. I say somewhat brief because I'm definitely going to go on some tangents. And the way that community interacted with the sport. I am also going to highlight some key figures and finish up with a reflection of what the park means and implies in regards to skateboard, both history and culture, not just in Vancouver, but at a larger scale. Now, I began this project with a lot of different ideas, like I said, was starting with the films, and part of that is because I didn't know where to start. I had to pull a lot of different research from a lot of different places. One of the aspects of lesser started histories, like skateboard culture, is the sheer variety of sources you have to find and make use of. In my case, I ended up looking at interviews of skateboarders, various films who talk about the skateboard culture and history, and they usually reference or recommend a lot of different people who are in the scene and I have to go then looking for those people's articles, and thank heavens, some people are pack rats. Thank you. Now, one of the texts I made use of was The Concrete Wave by Michael Brook, who is considered to be an original skateboarding historian publisher. He posits that throughout the 20th century, there were boosts of popularity in skateboarding that he termed waves. So here, I'm going to give a quick overview of Brook's wave theory, as I use it as a period focus tool, and I make references to it quite regularly, and it's just easier to explain it now. So there's the first wave, which is 59 to 65. Where sports initially called sidewalk surfing, as I'm sure some of you are aware, and had a popularity at that point similar to the yo-yo. Brief, intense, and it was quickly forgotten generally by the public, except among the diehards. Now then there's the second wave, which is where we're focused primarily, and it is often the focus of nostalgia, of skateboard history in general, though as the 70s gets further away, that nostalgia has been moving more towards the third and fourth waves of the 80s, 90s. Now, Brook's book was published in 1999, and he posits that the fourth wave was 1993 to the present day. That being 1999, I'd say that it probably ended at closer to 2005, 2006 with the invention of YouTube and the change of how skateboard video culture happened. I evidence this by Avril Lavigne, Skater Boy 2002. I would also argue that we are currently more in a fifth wave of popularity. This would be, again, probably early 2010s, that'd be going on to the present day, just with the resurgence of nostalgia in regards to skateboarding sports. There's a lot of people who are picking up the sport again that they used to do as a teen, tween, younger, and now they're like, hey, I'm 45, I've got nothing better to do, I've got health insurance, let's do this. Now, for the purposes of China Creek, again, I am focusing primarily on the second wave, a little bit into third wave, but we are going to visit the first wave just again for a bit of that setting. Now, for those who aren't aware, the general narrative of skateboard history is that it started in California. It's primarily a youth concern. Adults don't really care or they're not interested unless they're scolding you or trying to arrest you for doing so, and that trespassing is part of the culture. This, based on my research, is not wholly correct. There is no one origin story. It started in California, maybe. There's lots of different origin points all across not just the US, but Canada, in the UK, in Australia. Everybody seems to be the first person to take the rollerblades and nail it to a board and ride it down a hill. There's a lot of people saying, oh yeah, we emptied out our pool in the 1960s and rode our skateboards down that. It's like, are you sure? Are you sure? Was a pool even available at that point? But yeah, there's not really any one origin story that we can track down just because there's all these multiple happening. Now, a lot of adults were actually interested and supportive of the sport. Kids couldn't really financially afford or facilitate the ability to skateboard without some level of support from adults. it's not really something that's easy to do, to get a pre-made skateboard, unless you can already have your own job and can afford purchasing it yourself. So parents have to be supportive at some level. And adults were supportive of competitions and getting involved. So it's clearly not that they're not interested. Trespassing, yeah, okay, this is true, at least to some extent. Now, the issue with trespassing is that it is a fundamental disagreement of what qualifies of public and private space, typically with skateboarders. There are aspects of reclaiming public spaces, as well as established narratives in skateboarding history of old spaces that have been abandoned, like construction projects that just never got finished, that were open concrete for them. So even though they're technically trespassing, they're making use of empty space. So is that really that bad? Liability insurance says otherwise. Now, I'm sure we've all seen no end to the signs of the no skating and numerous actual public areas, again, because of liability concerns. But the other side of trespassing is that it is so ingrained in the culture of skateboarding that I'm actually going to return to California for this. It has these, for lack of a better word, mythology attached to it. In 1978, Southern California experienced a drought so severe that people left LA and their pools dried up. This was incredibly tempting for skateboarders who would then trespass and carve up the bowls. This was so fun for them that some started carrying around a pump. They'd scout out a empty, well, not even an empty pool. They just scout out a cool-looking swimming pool, and they'd pump out the water, skate the bowl, and then the owners would come home and call the police. Now, I know I'm drifting quite a far away from Vancouver, but one more little cool bit that I have to introduce as part of my introduction to looking into skateboarding history is, of course, who else? Tony Hawk. Can't really research skateboarding without talking about Tony Hawk at least a little bit. Now, this video is something I came across early on in my original research, and something that helped me when I think about concepts of urban, shared, and athletic spaces and how public space is policed. The clip that I'm going to play here, he's specifically talking about filming for Police Academy 4, Citizens on Patrol, just for your all own knowledge there. And there are 7 Police Academy movies. I had to learn that.
The coolest part about this is that we run a Hollywood production, so we just had free reign of downtown Toronto. So if we chose a spot, they would go get it approved. This is the kind of thing that I used to do as a teenager. We would get arrested for that in a parking garage. And here we had full approval and we're getting paid for it. It was crazy.
So here is a great example of the discourse of public and private spacing. This is a public parking garage, but it's a private enterprise that runs it. Thus, it's not a public space at all. But where else are the skaters going to go skate that gives them the same kind of concrete environment? I don't know. Maybe Greater Vancouver area has some concrete streets around. Now, again, I am a Canadian historian, so we are going to go back to Canada. This is where we're going to stay. Thanks to Tony Hawk for, getting me going on this. But let's briefly visit now the public opinion of that first wave of skateboarding in the Lower Mainland, circa 1965. Oof. Looking at this, it's little indicative of the general opinions. These are, again, specifically from 1965, with one banning the sidewalk surfing in 2 municipalities, actually in Victoria. Public opinion isn't really on the side of skateboarders. As the Saanich police chief noted, somebody's going to get killed. This is the general narrative of most Vancouver-based newspapers and newspapers around the Greater Vancouver area. I'd like to say that I have yet to note any deaths attributed to skateboarding. There are a lot of articles I have yet to go through, but it's primarily a lot of concerns regarding injuries, which is fair. But this is the general narrative of skateboarding at the end of that first wave. Is it going to change? No, but also yes. So these are both from 1976. It's a few years into the second wave, and these articles indicate both the continued narrative of skateboarding being too dangerous, but also how things are changing for the better. it also indicates of how money is coming into play. There were numerous revenue avenues in skateboarding being established, being developed, and let's be honest, economic viability is always an influencing factor when it comes to how the public perceives anything. I'm also of the opinion that in 10 years, the kids who were breaking their legs in newspaper articles are now young adults with their own voices who are probably influencing the narrative, potentially teaching kids how to hang 10. Now, as previously established, one of the problems of skateboarders faced was a lack of place to legitimately practice. At this time, most skate parks that were available were pay-to-enter parks, and they required waivers and money, and they were located outside the city. The cost of those skate parks were usually about $250, which is about $15 to $20 like today. A little bit steep for your average 12, 18, 25-year-old. And usually transport was not easy to facilitate, again, for a variety of reasons. There were some locals who would put together ramps that were used by locals, and I found several articles of the city taking notice and saying, hey, you gotta tear that down for liability reasons. Now, pictured here is the first attempt to deal with this issue. Is actually the first official skate park in the Greater Vancouver area. It's thought to be Canada's first ever skate park, and in West Vancouver, opening 1977. Unfortunately, it was short-lived, a casualty of the waves of popularity, and it was buried over in 1984. But its creation had influence on other parks in the area. Some of you may be familiar with Bruce Emmett's work regarding this park. It's also known as the Inglewood Mills Skateboard Park, and I recommend, if you're interested, looking into his work regarding the park. There's a great article from North Shore Heritage about his work specifically. But this park was only the beginning of public skate parks in the Greater Vancouver area. People noticed that by having an official permanent park, it decreased the need for creating or seeking out skateboard environments, aka trespassing, and thus increased enthusiasm to have, hey, maybe let's have a few more of these permanent ones. Enter China Creek. So in the mid and late 1970s, same period as the YMCA is offering skateboarding lessons and the West Vancouver Skateboard Run is being developed, the China Creek Park was going through a variety of developments. Both China Creek Park North and South were being totally made over. China Creek South specifically was a former trash dump that was filled in to be a park, which the local neighborhood improvement project has taken on. The NIP is a community-run and led organization that accomplishes the fundraising, grant applications, and organization of development and so on in order to create park environments attractive, that are useful for the local neighborhood. And the agreement between the NIP and the Vancouver Parks Board is that once the work was completed, the city would come in to ensure upkeep and the like, just to keep the park going. So briefly, here are the 3 years of development of the China Creek South Skateboard Park. 1977, the idea is introduced. 1978, there's a lot of development of the park. 1979 is when the park opens. Those are the main 3 years that we're going to be focusing on here tonight. And really quick, here are some key players. The main characters, I'd say, are Catherine Home, who's the main neighborhood improvement project Mount Pleasant site office coordinator and seeming project leader for the skateboard park. She's also my hero and benefactor with her record keeping. She kept almost all of the memos and news articles and various other documents in a folder for me to get my hands on about 45 years after the fact. Thank you, Catherine. And then there's Nelson Holland, who was the designer of both the West Vancouver Skateboard Run and who became the designer of China Creek's skateboard park. Holland's name is regularly brought up in the archive, and he seems to be a very enthusiastic figure, not just in relation to the project, but specifically in relation to the project. Some other people I'm going to quickly recognize here just so that their names are on the board so you guys can see them. Neighborhood House teen worker Carol White and the Neighborhood Improvement Project Subcommittee member Alf Worthington. We're about to get into them, so I won't go dive into too far that. And Reverend George Whitford, minister for the Grace Memorial United Church. I'm actually going to save talking about him later because he is very interesting. Now, the park. November 8th, 1977. This is a while ago. There was a public meeting held by the Neighborhood Improvement Project, who were regularly updating and creating new social areas. Neighborhood house teen worker Carol White presented her case at the meeting for a permanent skateboard park in Mount Pleasant. Currently, various ad hoc skateboard areas have been set up by local youth, a popular one being across from the planning office on the unused former Belmont Motors site at Fraser and Broadway. And White described two skateboard park design alternatives. One that she figured would cost about $2,400 and required about 2,000 square feet, and the second that would cost about $10,000 and required about 1,500 square feet. I don't know what either of those looked like, but I think we can all imagine what the $10,000 must have been like. Now, after what is reportedly a lively discussion, the idea was put forward that the committee would ask the park board to consider the immediate establishment of a skateboard facility in the China Creek Park, and that a subcommittee would be formed to work with the park board, the neighborhood house, and the local youth to determine location specifics, construction funding, etc. for the facility, and the motion was carried out unanimously. Again, unanimously. Same time period as people are like, skateboarding is too dangerous in the newspapers. But it's also the same time that YMCA is holding skateboard lessons. I expected some kind of dichotomy to be happening, some sort of level of disagreement, and yet unanimous stands out to me. The whole group was like, yeah, let's put in a skateboard park to this ongoing project that we've already been working on for who knows how many years. Now, one of the subcommittee members, Alf Worthington, is tasked with supplying a petition of at least 42 names of locals in support of a skateboard park. 2 weeks later, they seem to meet every 2 weeks, the subcommittee reported to the NIP the plans to visit and research regarding the West Vancouver Skateboard Park with Mount Pleasant youths. And Worthington supplied a petition with 27 names of local youths in favor of a skateboard park. Not the 42, but 27 is already quite a fair number. And it's like, all right, that was only 2 weeks. Everyone seems to be really supportive of this. Then, December 5th, it's agreed that such a neighborhood-scale skateboard park could be a type of pilot project for the City of Vancouver. That's great phrasing. The project is officially no longer just an idea, but it's a plan to make a plan for a project. That's administration there for you. The project is basically has been given a yellow light. There's a notification letter for the meeting that simply states, recently a new suggestion for inclusion in China Creek Park has come forward, a skateboard run. I've added January 3rd, 1978 on here because while there wasn't a specific meeting of note, there's clearly been a holiday break period in between. The project was immediately and regularly in the public eye, and all sorts of people who are interested in the project, including one Reverend Whitford of Mount Pleasant area. Remember him? He contacts the NIP planning office January 3rd, 1978, and because he's worried about how long the project will take to become a reality. It's been on the books 2 months. It's suggested to the NIP that we try to do these things really quickly, and it indicates how intensely the park already has a wider community interest and support. Again, I can never get over it. That's 2 months later. It's like that it was even suggested, and then the Reverend's like, hey, so when are you going to get it done? Is it done yet? When's the concrete getting poured? Now, I've broken 1978 into quarters because, quite frankly, a lot happens in this year. The locals do have to be involved in the development. It's important that locals have a say in what's happening in their parks. A door-to-door report dated January 17th shows a survey done of the people of Mount Pleasant area, and they were largely actually in favor of the project. 98 people were contacted, and while 30 weren't home, 58 were, and they gave their okay for the project, which gives nearly a 60% majority of even the people who were able to answer the door in favor. It's higher than I expected to see after the unanimous vote. You'd think I'd stop being surprised. A month later, February 15th, concept is approved by the Board of Management of Mount Pleasant Neighboring House, which is actually a still running community leadership and development group, and the skateboard park is officially rolling. Now, as like you all likely know, for any project, there's a lot of meeting, a lot of planning, and paperwork involved before anything can get physically started. The designs for the skateboard park alone take a long time to get prepared, adjusted, and ensured suitable for the park itself. And while it's understandable, not many outside the process have the patience for this. And as previously established, it's not uncommon for local youths to build temporary ramps that were on empty lots or fields, and the city would have them torn down. Such as March 20th. This is a Vancouver Sun article about another ramp being forcibly torn down by the city. Featured here, it discusses how another group of Vancouver children have built a skateboard ramp, and once again, City Hall has told them it will be torn down. It's really sympathetic to the kids. As I've mentioned, there's lots of these ramps happening, and lots of them being built, lots of them being ordered to take down. And this article is fairly pro-skaters, but what's really interesting is the people who are quoted in the article, who are outraged on behalf of the kids. The article goes on to tell about the kids' petition to keep the ramp, which received 350 signatures. One of the quotes notes that the kids are willing to sign a paper that releases the city of responsibility if they get hurt, and that this gives us a safe place to meet and keeps them off the streets. The community in this area are very aware of the issues that are systemic to skateboard culture and skateboarding in general, and the importance of having a place for kids to skateboard somewhat supervised. Now, the other side of this is that the destruction of these informally erected spaces is essentially forcing skateboarders then to trespass and make nuisances of themselves and endanger themselves and potentially others in order to board in spaces that are not just convenient to them, but functional for them. The issue of safety is also becoming something of a hot topic in regards to skate parks. With a Hansard official record of debates, I had to look that up, from April 28th, we're discussing concerns regarding safety of skateboarding for youth and wondering of the safety of China Creek Park as a location. This is primarily due to the location of a main road next to the park, and there's concerns about the combination of flying skateboards and traffic, and how this would affect things such as liability insurance. We always seem to come back to liability insurance. Fortunately, at that April 28th meeting, there is still also a petition and letter dated April 25th. Because beyond location and insurance, China Creek is also facing questions of regarding to the soil quality of the park and in regarding to funds issues, so there's a financial problems, but the local youth of China Creek Park has been closely supervising, and they've written this letter of support for the park, which was included in the arguments about it. It discussed at the time lack of safe skateboarding facilities and how the writers of the letter are open and are of the opinion that a skateboard park would be a necessary addition to the community. And I'd just like to point out one of these signatures that some of you might have already noticed, Nelson Holland. The letter mentions him several times by name, and that the writers of the letter have discussed the park with him. This, among other documents of his various ideas, shows his investment in the project and his eagerness that the project would succeed. A lot of the documents discuss how he's going to the location and he's talking to the kids and trying to figure out what they want and what they would like to see at the park. And he's very enthusiastic. I know I said that before, but this level of enthusiasm is quite clear in the documents. Now, finally, we're in the second quarter. Eventually, after more conversations, there is a green light as of May 10th, when a notice letter to the Mount Pleasant area is sent out regarding the start of construction for the skateboard run in June 1978. There's further confirmation of the location suitability as of a June 2nd memo from the Vancouver City Council meeting saying that the China Creek South Park soil samples are all right and that the City Park Board is prepared to undertake the annual maintenance upon the completion of the park. And now we can start building the park, right? Right? Well, Catherine Home, thank you again, who's again the main NIP Mount Pleasant site office coordinator and senior project leader for the skateboard park, speaks with Nelson Holland, who's the designer, on July 13th, because she has concerns about the reports of injuries that she's been, again, receiving, and they discuss solutions as reductions on the ramps to reduce speeds and nets for runaway skateboards, because I don't know if any of you have seen that before, but they will fly. Now, no sooner do they have this conversation, does Home have to trade a hard hat for a firefighting helmet, because a news article on the project has been published without consultation that contains both false and misleading information about the project's funds. That's kind of a problem when this is meant to be a community fundraised project, and the idea is that there's problems with the money. That's the fastest way to kill a project. Now, there were also several concerns over why the project only received one bid, which caused the need for a report to why there was only one bid from contractors. It ultimately turned out that it was due to a lack of time to put together a bid, and also as well as concerns regarding the inexperience of the contractors. Skateboard parks are new. Skateboard bowls are new. It's a new type of working with the concrete. It's a new type of working with like plaster. There's new types of plaster and top coats that are being developed specifically for skateboarders. The contractors didn't necessarily have the confidence of being able to do the time turnaround as well as learning the new equipment. This all happens in July. We had a meeting with him July 13th. The next several things happened in those 2 weeks. Home managed, delegated, and had personal discussions with the interviewee of the article and wrote a correctional notification to the publisher. It was fixed. There was less outrage. Yay. Has come August 17th, the contractors are sorted. There's hope that the project can finally move along. And then there's more soil samples taken, and the conditions are totally inadequate to support Nelson Holland style of skateboard run project according to the further testing the contractors have done. We have yet to break ground on these skateboard bowls. Now, the maps for the initial designs were also discovered to be totally inaccurate, and there will be more issues than expected regarding uneven ground settlement. Again, was a former trash heap. This means that the discussions regarding the placement of the run, or if it ought to be moved to another park, are scheduled again. We're back to March. Now, I'm going to give you a little break with all of that to show you an early draft of the park run designs. This is from 1978 September. But again, because of all the problems previously established, this had to be changed again. This is one of several designs that I know were submitted. There's only a few of them that are actually part of the archival folder. This is the best picture I was able to give of a one. But it's a really good for showing also why the plans had to be changed so often. Again, I don't know how many of you have been to China Creek Park, but the park isn't that big. This is a huge take away of the space, and there had to be considerations for other activities because it's meant to be a multi-purpose space. Unlike the West Vancouver Run, which was specifically for skateboarding, it's a small local area. It needs to have green space. It needs to have like park paths. It can't just be the skateboard park. Again, soil, ongoing issue. It seemed that the more soil samples they took, the more problems that were found, again, because of the trash heap and the inaccurate maps. So the design had to keep being changed in accordance to this because of the pillars that had to be put in place to hold up the weight of the concrete bowls. Those pillars, their own expense, their own trouble, and they had to figure out how to put them through the trash, through the soil, and again, to support the bowl's weight. And there's, of course, the other third main issue, money. The budget was fairly limited. This is an add-on to an already ongoing project, and there were concerns about the park board's willingness for upkeep. The bigger the park, the bigger the cost of repairs, and being able to fund the park's establishment was only one aspect of the money concerns. You have to work not only within your own budget, but within the expectations of future budgets to be applied. In the end, though, China Creek did remain the choice, and more new designs and plans were drawn up. Home was able to confirm with Holland that he may proceed on October 25th, and from November 24th through December 12th, 1978, the project continues. Ground is broken, the project's being put in place, it's working. Took a year, but we got there. Now, in this fourth quarter, I'm going to go back to Reverend George Whitford, who is he's great, honestly. October 18th, he contacts Ms. Home with concerns regarding the time that the project is taking. Kind of fair. And he's also concerned about the recently destroyed skateboard ramps made by children and their families. Again, because the project is taking so long, there's no space for the kids yet. Now, this is the same Whitford from January, And he's contacted her to propose a new replacement should be given the approval for temporary building permit and development permit on site. He explained that the owner of the specific property he's discussing, Mr. Perel, does not intend to develop the lot at present, and the Reverend says that Mr. Perel has given approval that the skateboard run can be constructed on the site, with providing the children and parents are fully responsible in case of any accidents. Reverend Whitford said that a letter to this effect has already been submitted and signed by the parents to Mr. Perel. That sounds reasonable. Home reports that she advised him that the skateboard parks were not normally identified use by the bylaw he was referencing at the time, and she promised to look into whether approval would be likely or not. They eventually agreed that no action would be taken by the children or parents to construct a new skateboard project without the full support of all city departments, and that every endeavor would be made to undertake the inquiry in this regard. There were discussions for the idea to build a temporary skate park until the China Creek project was completed, but unfortunately on December 5th, she was contacted again about this by Reverend Whitford, who unfortunately advised her that the complications had arisen with the regard to approvals for application for a temporary building permit for this temporary skateboard project. Basically, no, it's not going to happen. Holm wrote of Whitford, he noted many frustrations in dealing with this particular project and indicated that the requirements being requested by the City Hall, such as giving the sizes of nails and suggesting heavy tax increases on the property owner's land on which the skateboard project would be located, is bringing about other problems. He suggested that all efforts were not being made to cooperate with the citizens who were attempting to undertake a valuable community facility until the permanent skateboard project is completed. Holm notes that she advised him that hopefully the permanent one would be constructed in its place, though it's not mentioned to how he responded to this reply. This is fascinating and unexpected, in my perspective, in regards to the involvement of a community leader during this second wave of skateboarding. Reminder, this is 1978. Reverend Whitford is a spokesperson for what is typically assumed to be a conservative-minded group, and yet he's making a point to be personally involved and pushing forward for the betterment of skateboarding youth, who are generally considered to be outliers of society. Today, the impression is that anyone who would do something would be an outlier and societally non-conforming themselves. Yet here's an individual essentially proving the opposite of this. This is one of the reasons I find China Creek fascinating. It's just, it in of itself, in its very comparatively small existence, countermines almost all general narratives of skateboarding history. You don't really expect a reverend to be like, hey, these kids need to roll on their boards, and you need to let them. And that's really cool. Now, we get to 1979. It appears to have begun quietly, construction somewhat slow in the kind of torrential rain that Vancouver tends to enjoy during December through March. And there are some construction issues in regards to the concrete and the layering of the plaster, somewhat in regards to environmental issues, but also in regards to some vandalism and some overly eager skateboarders who just, they see the concrete and they gotta ride it. They gotta ride it, man. But again, the special types of plaster, top coat, and sealant are all recommended for the purposes of the skateboard bowls that are being put into place. But by opening day, it's starting to breathe down the necks of everyone involved, and they're really buckling down to make their deadlines. I was going to poke out a couple things, but on the essence of time, I'm just going to pop over to opening day. This is just such a great photo. Now, opening day, their opening ceremonies were a success. There was over 150 citizens that attended, as well as MPs, MLAs, and several other distinguished members of the public. It began at 3:30, May 9th, 1979, and Holm opened the ceremonies, introduced some special guests for speeches, facilitated the ribbon-cutting ceremonies, and received a Canadian flag, which Holm notes that she intends to place in the NIP office. Then there was an exhibition of skateboarding that was carried out by the Ripper Squad, and under the direction of Monty Little. Reportedly, the exhibition was appreciated by all, and overall, Holm considered the opening ceremonies to have been a great success, having been fortunate with beautiful weather, yay, and there have been many acknowledgements of the NIP programs. As far as the skateboarding bowls themselves, ultimately 2 were built, a bathtub and a teacup. Only one had been finished that afternoon by the plasterers, and the other bowl was able to be used for the exhibition, but still required a final coat. It's noted that Nelson Holland stressed to the children that they should not use these bowls before the weekend because it would take time to cure the plaster. That's a great opening day. You can use it today. Just hold off a little bit longer. It's not done yet. It is interesting to note, though, that while the opening ceremonies had occurred, Home acknowledged that there was work still to be completed on the project and that the park board will be landscaping, the fencing, and the water fountain in other details that are complementary to the project, causing curiosity at this opening ceremonies having occurred at all. But between neither bowl being completely finished and due to one of them having an issue of hardening and the other one having been vandalized, and the damage was to the point that there was a general review and inspection of the site on top of a police investigation. The internal investigation of the laying of the concrete also found issues with the contractors not following the instructions regarding the laying of the specific type of concrete. But by May 23rd, the issues were seemingly resolved, and then they got repeated with vandalism and damage. But throughout May and June of 1979, they continued doing studies and inspections. But the park is open, it is being used, it is being facilitated, and in the end, NIP moves on, and the park board has taken over maintenance as per the agreement. It's operational, it's ready, it's taken its place in the Vancouver skateboard culture. Yes, we got there. And now we're going to jump ahead 8 years to 1987 to check on the park. Unfortunately, less than a decade after the park opened, the park's at risk of being closed. All of that, and the park is not being upkept properly. It's at the risk of following the footsteps of the West Vancouver Skateboard Run. Again, that was covered over in 1984 in that dip of popularity. 1987 is that early period of that third wave of popularity. So it's at risk of being considered not useful. But there's also another actually national issue of concern. There's the disrepair that's happening, but there are insurance concerns because there's been national coverage on lawsuits regarding children getting injured on government land. And the court-ordered payouts are not small. This is really scary for a lot of municipal governments because they're the ones who have to pay out for those injuries and the court fees. And skateboard parks are a risk-heavy environment. However, this is another petition in support. The locals of China Creek South Park are not for the closing of their park, and this petition is really cool. I know I keep saying that, but like the youngest signee on this petition is 7 years old. The oldest one is 57. That's just like that's neat, isn't that neat? And I also include this letter here. I don't know how many of you have already read it, but I love it for a variety of reasons. This is a 7-year-old. I'd like to briefly acknowledge that and appreciate whoever typed up the letter, because that means I didn't have to try to read a 7-year-old's cursive. It probably would have been better than mine, but the point stands. I love it for a variety of reasons. It's indicative to youth perspectives and youth's intention and getting involved with what's important to them. But I think it also is really indicative to how poorly maintained the bowls were. A 7-year-old wrote this Vancouver City Council that to help with liability concerns, the city can post signs, and for the park, you can fix it up a lot. A 7-year-old is telling a group of adults, hey, if you fix up the park, it'll be better. I don't know if you've ever tried to talk to a 7-year-old about any kind of mess. If they said, oh, it's a little messy, that's a typhoon has gone through. No. The petition and the letter were helpful, it seems, as the council did agree to repair the bowls. Maybe a 7-year-old telling them to clean up their room put a fire under their butts. And they did put more protective measures, such as signage around the park. Now, at last, I am going to show you the park. So this is what we ended up with. There is the bathtub bowl and the teacup bowl, so named for the shapes. You can't really tell from here, but the teacup bowl looks essentially as if you took a teacup and you dipped it down. There's a main bowl area, and then there's a little dip as if that would be the handle, and that's generally an entry point. This is a Google Earth photo, and you can see how the final design was far less ambitious than the one they initially hoped for. But with the numerous issues the project faced, it's kind of impressive that we got this at all and that it's withstood the test of time. Now, since its opening, there were other occurrences, though I have yet to track down some of the specifics in the archives. Their inclusion in the China Creek South files were already surprising with how long after the park's establishment they were. There was ongoing adding and removing of signage, fencing, but what's most interesting to me is a daily supervisor was at the park. They were meant to ensure the safety equipment and rule following of all who partake, not dissimilar to a poolside lifeguard. And the first mention I have of them is when they were deemed no longer necessary, March 6th of 1992. That is a long time to have someone going and spending their days supervising a park. The position was noted as redundant due to a lack of frequency, due to a frequency of unsupervised use at night, but also a lack of accidents. And they agreed to add more signage to counteract the fact they were removing the supervisor. And I personally look forward to continuing to look into China Creek specifically, if only so I can figure out when they put in the supervisor and what was their duties. Did they just sit in a lawn chair next to the bowl 8 hours a day? Was that their job? Can I get that job? Now, this is the park when I visited it in 2023. I'd like to note that besides one sign, there's a distinct lack of signage than I would have expected based on how many times they talk about putting signage in the archives. I'll be honest, I thought maybe it was like an abandoned protest. There was just going to be signs littered everywhere. No. What's pictured here is the bathtub bowl. I chose not to photograph the teacup because at the time there was some awkwardly graphic graffiti. But as you can see here, this is actually a very popular graffiti for skateboard bowls that when you wipe out, that someone does a chalk outline. It's quite common. You see them in a lot of different bowls. They're fun. It's fun. Now, as you can see here, I already talked about that. The signage, there we go. Now, this is what the park got updated to more recently. This is the present day. As some of you may know, the park was recently updated. So dear to the community and so dear to the history of skateboard culture, it received an update and included some ramps. I'm going to see if I can get that to work. So we got some ramps going on here. There's a widened concrete area. And I took a look last May. The difference is quite intense to what it was previously. I'm actually going to show you just a quick comparison there. Looking at the comparison of the parks here and the initial plans, not only does the investment by the community, but the changes in the sport are both visible. At the time when the park was put into place, there were the ideas of having the ramps, but this is a generally like a free, open free space. There's a lot more specific usage here and intention for what kind of skateboard tricks and just general use that can be done with the space of the park. Now, by continuing to research into its history, China Creek South shows how the general skateboarding narrative, again, is not only inaccurate, but that the history speaks to the way that communities and governments work together in order to create varying levels of public space. And here's the final picture, just from my own May visit. So now we get to see what it looks like, not totally scrubbed clean. I'd like to, again, quickly thank the Vancouver Historical Society for inviting me and you all for coming and listening to me natter on about this really, really cool thing I like that very few people seem to be otherwise letting me talk to them about for an hour. I've got a lot of support for this Continue to Evolve project. Professors, my parents who have never stopped sending me pictures of skateboard parks since I started doing this project, and my friends who will let me just talk about this for usually about 20 minutes at a time. But for the interest of time, I'm going to stop and say thank you and leave it there.